today's World Insight with Tian Wei, a congressional impeachment inquiry into the conduct of the U.S. president. How does it affect U.S. foreign policy? And conversation with the son of legendary diplomat Zbigniew Brzezinski. Why have U.S.-China relations stalled since his father's generation?
If I want you to fail, we're not going to have a friendship. If I want you to succeed, it's more likely we'll have a friendship.
And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. I'm Tian Wei. We start today's show with a fast-moving impeachment inquiry into the U.S. president's conduct. The Trump administration ruled out cooperation on the inquiry in a letter to U.S. House Speaker. Mr. Trump is accused of breaking the law by pressuring Ukraine's leader to dig up damaging information on a political rival. New developments and details come out each day, and people wonder whether it would lead to a constitutional deadlock. Take a look.
The fight between the White House and Democrats escalates. A key witness, Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, is set to testify Thursday before Congress. Democrats say Sondland served as an intermediary between President Trump and the Ukrainian president, as the U.S. president allegedly pressed Ukraine for a favor. Mr. Trump wanted his Ukrainian counterpart to investigate possible misconduct by the son of former Vice President Joe Biden, one of Trump's potential rivals in next year's presidential election. Sondland will be testifying in response to a subpoena. He initially declined after U.S. State Department ordered him not to cooperate. Republicans say the hearings are politically biased. Democrats began the impeachment inquiry against the U.S. president last month after a whistleblower complained about a July phone call, while Mr. Trump allegedly pressured the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden's son. Earlier, a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine told congressional investigators that Trump ousted her based on unfounded and false claims. She was abruptly recalled from Kiev in May. Two foreign-born businessmen with ties to Trump's lawyer were arrested last week, accused of conspiring to bypass federal laws against foreign interference by funneling foreign money to political candidates. Trump has distanced himself from the arrests.
I don't know those gentlemen. Now, it's possible I have a picture with them because I have a picture with everybody. Maybe they were clients of Rudy. You'd have to ask Rudy. I just don't know.
The White House also ruled out cooperating with Congress on the impeachment inquiry. In an 8-page letter sent to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, White House lawyers questioned the constitutionality, legality, and motives of the inquiry. Congressional investigators insist that it is well within their power to request documents and witnesses, something they are allowed to do, they say, under the U.S. Constitution. How would the impeachment process likely play out?
On the U.S. Congress impeachment inquiry into Trump's conduct, we have an all-American panel. In Chicago, Laura Schwartz, a political commentator who worked at the White House during the Clinton years. In Iowa City, we invited Tim C. Hagel, professor of political science at the University of Iowa. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Robert Moran, a partner with the global advisory firm Brunswick Group. Welcome to the three of you. It's hard for me from outside the United States to catch up with everything that is going on related to the impeachment. I really need your insights desperately to help us understand better. Mr. Schwartz, is this more about partisan rather than a trust about a president?
This is very much about the president conducting business on behalf of the United States by trying to get dirt on a political rival through a foreign country, which is a big no-no here in the United States. It goes against everything the Constitution and the democracy stands for. So I really don't see this as partisan. I see this as policy of the United States. I see this as an infringement of the law. I am looking forward to facts coming out like everybody else, but I think the facts should come out. I don't think we can make a decision right now, but it's not even he said, she said. The transcript, the memorandum of the call came out, and it confirmed that, yes, this was said, this was asked for, and now they're lining up to see exactly what money may have been held back by from the United States to the Ukraine. And so I really think this is above political and partisan powers at this moment.
Mr. Moran, this would have a lot to do with whether parties that are important in providing information will be able to come out or not, under what circumstances they will be able to do that or not, and what would those, whether yes or no, say to the overall situation, Mr. Moran?
Well, I think, as the prior guest just noted, we have a process for this, and we're going to have an impeachment inquiry moving forward. That could ultimately move to an impeachment vote in the House, and then if the House does vote to impeach, that then goes to a trial in the Senate. We have quite a bit of public opinion polling in the United States on this, but it's starting to jumble support for impeachment versus removal, which are somewhat separate things. But we've had here in the States a number of surveys come out in the last couple days, including a Fox News survey that showed 51% support for impeachment and removal. The national average for most surveys is about 48–49% support for impeachment and just a little bit less for removal. The challenge, I think, in our political environment is support or opposition to impeachment and removal is heavily partisan, is heavily based on party right now in the public opinion data. But I think we just need to go through the process. We have a Constitution. The Constitution has a process for this. And I think it's good to get the facts out and go through the process. And
I feel good also about inviting Professor Hagel, who is exactly doing his research a whole life on about Constitution, U.S. Constitution, of course. So, Professor Hagel, what exactly is the process? What are some of the tumbling blocks we're likely to see for a near future, shall we say, investigation or other processes related to this?
Well, in terms of the Constitution having a process, it does to a very limited extent, meaning that the Constitution doesn't say much about it. It just says that the President or other officers of the United States can be impeached and removed from office. High crimes and misdemeanors is a phrase that's often talked about, but really it's a political process, as most people recognize here, rather than a criminal process. But the two sort of come together in terms of people's perception as to what the process ought to be. And to a certain extent, that means that the process should be open to the extent that it can be, again, assuming that there are no state secrets or national security issues that are involved in the people testifying. But it means that it has to be above board, that both sides should have an opportunity to be heard, to call witnesses and so forth when you're investigating the basis for the impeachment inquiry. And that's one of the things that right now the Republicans are complaining about, that they aren't getting a full access to things, they aren't being allowed to subpoena and all that kind of thing. And so to a certain extent the process is a little bit different this time, because the previous at least two impeachment trials, in Nixon in the 70s, or not trial, but impeachment inquiries, Nixon in the 70s and Clinton in the 90s, that it started with a vote of the House to begin this inquiry, and that didn't happen this time. So that gives something for Republicans to at least complain about, saying that Democrats aren't approaching this in a non-political, nonpartisan manner, which then gives them the opportunity to characterize it as a purely partisan fight.
So, Mr. Moran, if you think about this, what is the most important thing now, knowing the fact that the earlier impeachment inquiries did not lead to impeachment exactly of the president, for example, about Clinton, about Nixon. So will this one more produce a product which would have an impact on political election in your country, or it will have an impact on some other issues? What do you say?
Well, that's a great question. I think American politicians are going to be looking at the political polling very closely. On the Republican side, if the polling starts to continue to build momentum for impeachment and removal, a number of Republican politicians may start to back away from the president, may start to support the process more, and then that could lead to a deterioration of the president's position. Much like what we saw in the Nixon years, where the public opinion during Watergate by 1974, early in 1974, was opposed to impeachment, but then support for impeachment grew to 57% on the eve of the president's resignation. And so I think public opinion is going to be something that Republican politicians most likely look very closely at. The issue here, though, is that the data itself, the people themselves, are polarized. Very few Republican voters support impeachment or removal. A large number of Democratic voters support impeachment and removal. And so how this gets played out is, I think, very important. The prior guest did make a good point, which is that the Republicans are, I think, able to argue to some extent that the process is itself at some level political. And of course, the impeachment process is, to some very real extent, political in the sense that there are political parties and they have other varying views on the topic. So,
Mr. Schwartz, very important topic to you as well, because what would that mean? You know, earlier Mr. Moran talked about the Republicans. Now, whether it's an opportunity for them to stand in different lines, that's a question for them. But what about for the Democrats, since you've been working for the Clinton administration? What would that mean for various candidates? Mr. Biden, for example, whose name is so much related to this one, and others, fate in their chances in the political election, within the party even.
That's a very good point, Tian. I think it really comes down to message strategy. How Joe Biden approaches this after being very quiet the first week that this came out really gave some missed opportunities for his campaign to just simply say, look at this president. He's throwing this out. He can't even focus on an election. He knows I'm a big threat to him. That's why he's doing this. There was no process found that was poor with my son. It's not the best thing out there, but it was investigated and nothing was found. So let's move on from this. But this just shows how petty our president is and why you need to vote for me to get him out in the next election. That is message strategy. Now, when it comes to Republicans, you know, during the Bob Mueller investigation, which just concluded this last summer, impeachment was thrown around a lot. A witch hunt, the president called it, was thrown around a lot. I think this is different because it's not about the election. It's about a request being made by a foreign government to investigate a domestic political rival. There's a transcript, a memorandum there to support that. There are hearings that are going to be happening. I learned a long time ago, especially during the Clinton impeachment, if you are honest, the truth can't scare you. I think the Trump administration is scared. They don't have an apparatus to fight this just yet. They're putting one together, but it really has been Donald Trump's tweets driving the message. But if they really go at this in a tactical way, they can attack the process, but I think Americans now, you know, the process isn't as much of a part as what's coming out in the process. That's what they're going to be paying attention to, and they need to as well.
Of course, this president is quite a charismatic one. I mean, that would be the adjective I would use to describe the president coming from another country. But at the same time, this is also a president who has been taking great advantage of the presidential power that he has so far, probably arguably more than many of the previous presidents. So would there be a lot of potential, legally speaking, also for this president to explore in terms of being able to protect himself and protect his administration, at least from his perspective?
That's one of the things that many people have criticized President Trump for, is that he's doing a lot of things that as president that perhaps he shouldn't be doing. Maybe Congress should be doing them, or just maybe they shouldn't be done at all. Republicans will fight back on that notion and say, well, wasn't it President Obama who said, well, I have a pen and I have a phone, and basically was willing to exercise executive action when Congress was basically stalled and couldn't do anything because of split control. And so we often see that you have these partisan fights over how much a president can or can't do. What sort of makes the problem worse here is that President Trump doesn't act like a usual politician. That was the case when he was a candidate. It's been the case as president. That upsets many people for a variety of reasons, but it also means that President Trump is perhaps more on the edge than some other presidents are in terms of the things that he does, what he says, what it means, and so forth. And it's very difficult to sort of sort through what's really instance of his abusing his power versus something that's just him being outside the norm in terms of his behavior.
Right. Mr. Moran, what do you make of that barometer, that rather blurred line Professor Hagel just mentioned?
No, I think Professor Hagel is correct. In some basic ways, President Trump has pushed the envelope in two dimensions. The first is using modern communications technology, Twitter, to directly communicate with his supporters and also to really set the agenda of media coverage. The second is just in his behavior. He's pushed the envelope in his behavior, which I think goes beyond or is very different from most Americans' expectations of presidential behavior. And I think these two things have really unsettled the American political landscape over the last several years. But look, we're talking about this process in October, a little over 1 year away from the elections. And when I look at the calendar, it almost feels like we would be better just going into the election and having the people decide at this point. And I think it's a really interesting issue of political strategy for the Democrats. Do they think that this will tie the president down? If they overdo it, does it actually bolster his voting base? It's a really complicated situation, but given the calendar, I wonder if it might not be better to just go straight to the election next fall.
Ms. Schwartz, of course, when it comes to Democrats, you might want to respond a little bit and also have a follow-up question for you, that you see Republicans also from time to time came up and challenged the current president. But as things or other crises came up, it seems that the lines is once again aligned. So what do you make of the future strategies that the Republicans is likely to have as a group also under the current circumstances, particularly in 1 month going into 1 year countdown of the election? Ms. Schwartz.
I was very much against impeachment proceedings for the Bob Mueller investigation. And even at the beginning of this, I wasn't quite sure if it's something the Democrats should move ahead with, because I really believe their target needs to be taking down Donald Trump at the polls on Election Day in just over a year. And I don't think going through an impeachment proceeding is going to help bolster their chances. In fact, I think it's quite a negative. Now, that was when it was the Bob Mueller investigation. And it just wasn't easy enough for the American public to understand. When this came through, much more easy to understand. You see the polling numbers that Mr. Moran was talking about. The public has moved both on whether or not we should have proceedings and whether or not the president should be removed. And so I think it was imperative to the election of next year that the Democrats could not let this go, and Nancy Pelosi, reluctant, came around to impeachment proceedings, because, and they would behoove themselves to again state this is beyond politics. This is about the democracy of the United States and a sitting president asking and possibly withholding funding from another foreign country to dig up political dirt on a domestic candidate. If proven, that is wrong, and that is impeachable. Whether or not he gets impeached by the Senate, I think that they probably will acquit him, but I think there's going to be some fractures and some breaks in the party along the way.
As I said at the very beginning of our discussion, ladies and gentlemen, this is very confusing to someone from outside your country. I guess for me, maybe even inside your country, you have to follow up every day in order to catch up with what exactly is going on. But, you know, this is a legitimate question, I guess, for all of us from the rest of the world to ask. Professor Hagel, I would throw that difficult question to you. How should we understand this process and be able to, you know, understand the politics vis-a-vis all the decisions that the United States and Washington now has to make as an important power of the world? You know, here in China, in Asia, or in the rest of the world, there seems to be a lot of things going on which the U.S. has to play a role, and now we do not know what's going to be next.
That's exactly right. It presents an element of uncertainty into the United States' role in world affairs, but it also does for those of us in the United States as well. That's just not entirely sure how this is going to come out. That there are some that believe very strongly that the president should be impeached and removed, and others believe very strongly it shouldn't. Some believe it's a highly partisan affair, political theater. Others believe the opposite. And it's just not clear as to how it's going to resolve itself. And that bit of uncertainty does provide problems for the United States in terms of putting together agreements of various sorts with other nations and how we proceed and work forward. And it's just not clear how that's going to work out until we actually either have some resolution as far as the impeachment side of things goes, but also in terms of the election next year. And to a certain extent, perhaps the impeachment is intended as a way to diminish the possibility that President Trump gets reelected. If that's the case, then we'll see how that turns out as well. But either way, it just provides that uncertainty, which makes it very difficult for the United States to act as that world actor, or that actor on the world stage.
One of the things we know, at least given the experiences of the earlier so-called impeachment inquiries in the U.S., is the uncertainties related to all parties. We do not know what kind of dirt is likely to be digged out at what time, about whom. So very complicated, I would say, hard to keep up with. But Mr. Moran, what do you think for the rest of the world? How should we watch this and see what's next?
So I would recommend taking a historical perspective. The Founding Fathers had a dilemma. On one hand, they wanted a representative democracy where we could elect our leaders. On the other hand, they were worried about individuals abusing that power, and they understood that no one should be above the law. So they had to come up with an emergency clause that could be enacted, that could be used to solve this dilemma. And that's why they created this. And it's a testament, if you think about it, to their wisdom. And a testament to the duration of the United States. We've been at this for a couple hundred years, and we've used this process several times.
Mr. Moran, I love your positive thinking, but we'll see whether it's that logic. Ms. Schwartz, same question to you, I guess. What about the rest of the world? How should we watch this?
He should be making positive choices for policy, showing that America continues to be a strength in the world, not make any rash decisions that his own party is against. So it's very troubling to me, because we are, as a country, strong, and we want to be allied with nations around the world and play a part in this incredible global interdependent community that we are in. It's an unfortunate reflection right now.
I notice a lot of adjectives in your answer, Mr. Schwartz. For now, I want to thank the three of you for joining us and helping us to understand really what is behind and what's likely to be ahead. Very important for all of us. Laura Schwartz, Timothy Hagel, Robert Moran, really appreciate it. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, I speak to the son of the legendary diplomat Brzezinski. Why have U.S.-China relations stalled since his father's generation? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. They say, like father, like son. That conventional wisdom at least could apply to this father and this son. Brzezinski, the father, and Mark Brzezinski, the son. The father was counselor to Lyndon Johnson's administration and national security advisor to President Jimmy Carter. He was instrumental in laying the foundation to the budding U.S.-China relationship. The son, Mark Brzezinski, a former U.S. ambassador to Sweden, inherited his father's fascination about the world, and he is most keen on the fate of U.S.-China relations. Earlier, I had a chance to sit down with Ambassador Brzezinski. Our conversation began at the Diaoyutai guest house, the very same guest house that hosted his father during those important visits to China many years ago. Diaoyutai State Guest House, that's where your father once wore.
Yes.
I'm sure you heard a lot from him, the stories decades ago about U.S. and China.
I did.
I'm sure those stories will be even more meaningful today.
Well, it's so great that you start this interview that way, because for the last couple of days, I really felt I was channeling my late father, because he believed so much in the Sino-U.S. relationship as having the potential to address some of the world's great challenges of today and tomorrow. He really felt that this is the most important relationship America has with the world. If he were still alive today, what he would be doing is he would be on American television using his credibility and his legitimacy as a statesman, as someone who had produced for the American people in foreign policy. He would be explaining to the American people how the Sino-U.S. relationship benefits them, and he would be coming to China to meet with the Chinese leadership and to say it takes two to tango. Both sides have to constructively engage each other. Both sides bring good aspects and things that need to be improved.
Do we still have statesmen like this?
That's an excellent question. The American political context has changed since the time of the Cold War. During the Cold War, who led American foreign policy? Kissinger, Brzezinski, Scowcroft, Albright. People who were true foreign policy scholars and who had steeped their knowledge in foreign policy from the very beginning to the very end. They weren't part-time foreign policy guys who joined a presidential administration because they'd helped the president campaign. These were America's and the world's best experts on the foreign policy challenges America faced around the world. Since the Cold War, the primacy of expertise in American foreign policy has been replaced by other priorities in the American political game. What counts in American politics today? Is it expertise? It's more about votes and more about money. That's the American political game. And as a result, you get what you ask for. When you elect a president today, there's a lot of political people, not foreign policy specialists, but political people who want jobs in government. The foreign policy jobs are very attractive. They want the foreign policy jobs, but they don't bring the expertise.
As a result of that, how do you see the potential between China and the United States? Now, Ambassador Brzezinski, you know better than I do that what's going on right now on the trade is only a portion of the U.S.-China relations.
That's right, yeah.
The real picture is much bigger than that.
Well, let's talk about both sides, because I think that's an important point. First of all, let's not minimize the trade differences. The trade differences are important for a key constituency, a key beneficiary of this relationship, the business community in both countries and also in other countries. Don't forget about that. And all of them want this to be solved, and all of them want America and China to operate within a rules-based system. And I'm actually confident that this will be resolved, because I believe that the Chinese have been clear that they understand that there are some problems that need to be fixed, and I think that that's a very constructive way to engage. My worry is a little bit more about the American side, because I don't believe the demonization of China is just about trade. I think that there is a demographic of policy people, security people, military people, political people, who for decades have been hoping to break the catalyst of the American-Chinese relationship, and their time has come. They have been empowered by the current moment. And if President Trump left office today, they wouldn't leave. They wouldn't want to give up the ground that they fought for. And so I'm worried.
What does it take to break this almost predictable trend, as you just said, that even though the administration could go on, but some of the quote-unquote legacies of the administration and the hardliners against China and against the potential of relationship to begin with are still going to be in the system?
Sure. Well, there are also beneficiaries of the relationship. The American business community clearly benefits from a constructive, normalized Sino-U.S. relationship. When I was the United States ambassador in Sweden, the Swedish government undertook an effort that was very interesting. They pulled together a document that was very digestible, very understandable for the American people, that analyzed state by state by state how many American jobs and in what sectors are based in that particular state on Swedish investment in, say, Virginia or Pennsylvania or New York or whatever, all 50 states. And they shared that with the business people in that state, the state governors who want to attract overseas investment, who then distributed it, and so forth and so on. That's the kind of knowledge dissemination that needs to occur about the American-Chinese relationship. And then there's the Chinese side. My father and President Xi had a very good, close, personal relationship. And when my father died, President Xi wrote my mother a personally very meaningful letter that she received. And we treasure that, and we thank President Xi for that. We very much respect the fact that he's been part and a central piece of the American-Chinese relationship. It is important to accentuate in Chinese policymaking that the success of both sides is part of the relationship. Because there are some in China who see China's long-term rise. There are some in China who see America's long-term decline. And there are some who actually celebrate that. That's no way to have a constructive relationship. If I want you to fail, we're not going to have a friendship. If I want you to succeed, it's more likely we'll have a friendship.
So how do you read, given the current realities in both countries, about the eagerness to develop better relations?
Well, I think that's based on self-interest. And I think that it will become clear as that self-interest is harmed by a breakdown of the relationship, that those who are losing the benefits of the relationship will speak out.
You mean we have to hurt more in order to know the real nature of the issue?
Well, I hope it doesn't come to that.
But probably that's something we have to face.
I think that we don't want the relationship to break down. If the relationship is based on preventing failure, it's not as strong as a relationship on mutual success. But it's important for the Americans to understand that China's success is a great story for the world's humanity. And that's something that I really want to emphasize. You know, the way people in one country perceive another country is not based on a study of data and statistics and facts. For regular people, that's not how they develop their perception of, say, China or Sweden or Germany. It's based on human interest stories.
That's right.
It's based on narratives. And the narrative of China over the last 40 years, going from a country that I visited in 1981, think about that, Chengdu, for example, which only had dirt roads and used army vehicles on the streets, to the tech city of the future, that Chengdu now. That is a great rags to riches story that I think Americans would really respect and embrace, because it's quite frankly universal and transferable to the American narrative as well.
Relations between China and the U.S. are in need of patching up. Mark Brzezinski has described the importance of savvy diplomats to fix what's broken. But in a time of partisan politics and policy by tweet, as some say, where can we find such professionals? Mark hints that in addition to perseverance, sometimes effective foreign policy is a family business. Let's listen in. Ambassador Brzezinski, you grew up in a family in which big matters can be discussed around the dinner table.
It's true. Very true.
I just wonder, what was it like to be in a family of the Brzezinskis?
It was the privilege of a lifetime, because we were just my brother, my sister,
Yes.
and I, and my sister is one of America's most popular television talk show
Sure.
hosts, and I think she would share this with you. When we were 7, 8, 9 years old, my father at the dinner table or lunch table would be asking us about détente, SALT II, the Middle East peace process, U.S.-China relations.
Quite an appetizer.
Yes, exactly. I'm surprised we didn't run away from home. But the point.
How did you manage to do that?
Exactly. But the point is that my father, as a Washington leader, included his family in his life, and that was a great gift, because not every Washington leader includes their family in their life. So just as stupid kids, we were brought to dinners with Deng Xiaoping and Mrs. Deng.
Did you still remember anything about it? Because you were
absolutely-
very, very young.
I absolutely remember it.
Tell me more about
it.
that.
It was very human. What do I mean by that? A dinner in your home being put on by the premier of China. Your street is closed off by the Secret Service. There are helicopters overhead, shining lights. The Secret Service says, 2 minutes out, Deng Xiaoping, Mrs. Deng are arriving in a long motorcade with police cars. And what happens in our house? My parents light the fireplace, and the smoke comes pouring out because they hadn't opened the flue. And so you know this story. They had to shut off that room
Right.
and hold the meeting with Deng Xiaoping in the front hallway. And I want to emphasize that. Because in families, not everything is perfect. And you got to just...
Usually, a lot of things are not perfect.
Exactly. And so you just deal with it.
Yeah.
So what we did was that we had that meeting there. My sister spilled caviar on Deng Xiaoping. But he included us. And he included us in things around the world. I mean, my sister traveled with my father to the Middle East and met Yasser Arafat. I traveled with my father throughout Europe and to Asia. All of us came to retrace Mao Zedong's Long March.
But you know, for the common folks these days,
Yeah.
when the media is pretty much portraying things from one perspective or not, what is the way for common people, you know, to be more sophisticated about what they're seeing?
The great Czech author wrote, "For every language you know, another life you live." And I think that's true. Americans and Chinese should learn foreign languages, because by learning foreign languages, you absorb consciously and subconsciously
Right.
what's going on with them. And I go back to my late father, who spoke 5 languages, and until his dying days would translate from Russian or Polish or French from newspapers, so that he would have a feel for what is going on in Europe or in Russia. And that's important, because it goes back to your initial question about foreign policy expertise. Because if you're uninformed, if you're told black is white, you'll believe it, because that's what you've been told. And foreign policy professionals need to be that professional.
Before we go, Ambassador Brzezinski, you're coming from a very well-known family.
Yes.
Your father fought his way to be where he was, absolutely through his personal fight, in a way, and efforts. What kinds of, you know, inspiration you get from your family, while at the same time, what kind of individual life you need to have of your own, apart or in addition to the family tradition?
No, my father was not born into money or power. He was cast on America's shores by World War II, so was an immigrant to America through Canada. And many people don't know this, but he had polio when he was little, and so wore leg braces when he was very young. So was he one of the chosen ones to take leadership? No, he wasn't. You said it. He had to fight for it, and he faced setbacks in his life. And there were times in my life when he shared stories that were meant to educate me. When I've had disappointments in my life, he said to me, Mark, learn from me. Make this a disappointment, not a defeat. And he shared with me the story that when he was a professor at Harvard, the most popular professor, giving lectures that would have audiences clap for him standing, he was then denied tenure when he and my mother expected to stay in Boston as an academic family for the rest of their life. But instead they said, I'm not going to make a defeat which brings me down and keeps me down, but a disappointment that I learn from and grow from. And he went to New York, but set his sights on Washington. And he said, how do I use Columbia University in New York, but also relationships in Wall Street to get to Washington? And he built a relationship with David Rockefeller, and he and David Rockefeller set up the Trilateral Commission, which became the most influential organization in international affairs. And he invited then Governor Carter to join the organization, and the rest is history. He was a Polish immigrant to America, standing toe-to-toe with the Soviets. That is what I learned. And so I know exactly what you're asking. There are good points, and there are some difficult points. But the good outweighs the different because of things like that.
Mr. Ambassador, what a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.